Alright, this is 3.4 part 2. That was my daughter. And we are going to be completing the square. Completing the square is extremely useful for the rest of this year, and it comes into a lot of use next year in Pre-Cal 12. You really want to know this, I would watch this video several times. I'm going to go see what she's up to, and I'll be right back. She's fine. We may just hear her once in a while. Alright, so completing the square basically manipulates our ability to change our formula, but mathematically keep it within our limits. So, if I have an example like x squared minus 20x plus 40 equals 0. Okay? To factor this is quite tricky, and what we want to do is what's called completing the square, find out our exact values for x. So, what you first want to do is separate your first and second term from your third term. We do this by basically putting them in brackets and taking your last term and leaving it outside. So what happens is going to go x squared minus 20x. We're going to put a bracket, and there's a space, and we're going to add 40, another bracket, and this equals 0. Okay. We're then going to put in a blank space behind each of these terms, which I just kind of did in one step. We're then going to find the perfect square of our second term. So we do this by we divide your middle term by 2, and then you square it. So 20, or negative 20, divided by 2 is negative 10, and then negative 10 squared is 100. I had to deal with this. Be right back. Okay, so we're now going to put that number into our first blank. So we have x squared minus 20x plus 100, and we're going to put the opposite number, because we can't just add 100 into an equation without also adding the opposite. We're also going to then add negative 100 into our second blank behind our 40. We're totally allowed to do this. It works just fine. Okay. Now we're basically going to add everything together and factor it. So I want you to factor this first term, which you'll notice becomes a perfect square, or should be. So you can kind of jump a few steps and say, well, my middle term is negative, my last term is positive, so I'm going to have, x minus 10 times x minus 10, and then 40 minus 100 is going to be negative 60 equals 0. Your goal is you want this to be a perfect square, right? Because I can simplify x minus 10 times x minus 10 into x minus 10 squared. I can take this negative 60 and put it onto my other side. So I have x minus 10 squared equals 60. Okay. This is we factored it, and we then collected all of our like terms. Now we're going to solve it based on the principle we just talked about earlier on, where we basically take the square roots to solve your quadratics. So you notice that this is squared, and I have 60. So I can take the square root of both sides, and when I do that, I'm going to be left with x minus 10 equals plus or minus root 60. Your last step is to basically solve this normally, so I'm going to have x equals plus or minus root 60, and then plus 10, because I'm going to add 10 to both sides. So finally, we're usually looking for actual answers when it comes to this. So the square root of 60, do it over here so you guys can see, is 7. We're going to add 10 to that. So our first root is going to be 17.74. We'll round up to 6. And our second one is going to be 60, but it is a negative. And then we're going to add 10 to that as well. So the x can also be 2.2540. And that would essentially be our two roots for completing the square. It looks tricky. It does take practice, but if you follow it slowly and do it step by step, it's not too bad. And we'll go over another example of this just so you really have it down packed. So I'm going to have 2 is going to be 2x squared plus 8x plus 5 equals 0. And before I get into any of this, what I really want to do is I'm going to divide everything by 2, because I don't really want a coefficient in front of my x squared. So when I rewrite this, I'm going to have x squared plus 4x plus 5 over 2 equals 0. Now I can go by completing the square. So just like last time, separate your two terms. So what I'm going to have is x squared plus 4x blank plus 5 over 2 blank equals 0. Okay. I take my middle term, divide it by 2, so 4 divided by 2 equals 2, and 2 squared is 4. So this now becomes x squared plus 4x plus 4. I'm going to have 5 over 2 minus 4 equals 0. I then want to factor this. So I've made this a perfect square, so x squared plus 4x plus 4 really becomes x plus 2 times x plus 2. Now when I'm subtracting a fraction from a whole number, I have to make it the same denominator. So 4 is really 4 over 1, so if I multiply both top and bottom by 2, I'll have the same denominator. And what I get is 5 over 2 minus 8 over 2 equals 0. 5 over 2 minus 8 over 2 really turns into, I'm going to simplify x plus 2 times x plus 2 and x plus 2 squared. 5 over 2 minus 8 plus 2, or 8 over 2 really turns into negative 3 over 2. This will equal 0. I'm then going to try and get this by itself. So I'm going to add 3 over 2 to both sides. So what I have is x plus 2 squared equals 3 over 2. And again, just like last time, root principle, if I take the square root of both sides, this will cancel out. So I'm now left with x plus 2 equals plus or minus the root of 3 over 2. And our very last step, subtract 2 from both sides. I'm left with x equals plus or minus root 3 over 2 minus 2. Now, your book might want you to rationalize your denominator, because they're going to view plus or minus root 3 over 2 as x equals plus or minus square root 3 over square root 2 minus 2, and having a root in your denominator. So to get rid of that, we have to rationalize it, and basically, if you recall, multiply everything by root 2. So what happened is we'd have x now equals plus or minus the square root of, well, 3 times 2 equals root 6. Root 2 times root 2 is root 4, and the square root of 4 is 2, and that whole thing is then minus 2. So your textbook will likely give you this as an answer. Most of you will get to this and get confused why you have this and not this. So be very careful about that. Your homework is on page 211, question 10, A, B, and the rest is on page 222, 5, A, B, 8, 9, 10, A, and 11, A, C. If you have any questions or concerns, come find me. I should be back by now. Have a good one.